The ocean glimmered beneath the California sun, bright, endless, and deceptively calm. It was November 1981, and the world was about to lose one of its brightest stars. But to understand how that night on the Pacific became one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries, we must first step back to the beginning of Natalie Wood's story. A life built on fame, fear, and the fragile illusion of perfection. Natalie Wood wasn't born into glamour. She was born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko in 1938 in San Francisco to Russian immigrant parents fleeing the shadow of the Soviet Union. Her mother, Maria, believed in fate. She once told people that a fortune teller had predicted her daughter would become a famous actress, but that she would also die in dark, troubled water. It sounded like a line from a tragic film. No one knew it would one day become a prophecy. From the time she could walk, Natalie was trained to perform. By age 5, she was already appearing in films. By 8, she had acted alongside Orson Welles. By 16, she had starred with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, a role that made her an icon. But behind the camera, she was a child, trapped in the machinery of Hollywood. The endless rehearsals, the pressure to be perfect, the adults who decided who she was allowed to be. To the public, Natalie Wood was the definition of grace and beauty. To those who knew her best, she was a woman haunted by deep insecurities and a paralyzing fear of drowning. She couldn't swim. Even as a child, she would panic near deep water. In interviews, she admitted it. "I'm terrified of dark water," she once said, "and of being alone in it." Ironically, that fear would define her fate. By the 1970s, Natalie Wood was one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses. She had the charm of old Hollywood and the raw emotion of the new era. But what made her more fascinating than any role was her love story with actor Robert Wagner. Robert Wagner was handsome, charismatic, and charming, the kind of man who embodied the golden age of Hollywood masculinity. When Natalie met him, she was only 18. He was 26. They fell fast, and in 1957, they married in what the tabloids called a match made in heaven. But heaven, as it turned out, doesn't last long in Hollywood. The marriage was passionate but turbulent. There were whispers of jealousy, alcohol, and explosive arguments. After just a few years, they divorced, both broken, both still in love. Yet fate wasn't done with them. A decade later, they found their way back to each other. In 1972, they remarried. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale rekindled. Two movie stars who had beaten the odds. But behind closed doors, old wounds never really healed. Natalie's life seemed perfect. 2 children, a beautiful home, a loving husband, and a career that had weathered Hollywood's changing tides. But inside, she was restless. Friends would later say she often spoke of her fear that something terrible was going to happen. She had vivid nightmares about drowning. And despite her success, she struggled with anxiety, insomnia, and the constant scrutiny that came with fame. In late November 1981, Natalie decided to take a weekend getaway on her yacht, the Splendor. It was meant to be a peaceful escape, a small group of friends, a little wine, some laughter under the stars. But that weekend would instead become one of the most dissected and haunting events in Hollywood history. Alongside Natalie and her husband Robert Wagner, there was another famous face on board, Christopher Walken, her co-star in the film Brainstorm. Also present was Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain and a man who had known the couple for years. The stage was set. 4 people, 1 yacht, and a night that would end with only 3 returning alive. Natalie was 43 years old, still luminous, still fragile, still carrying the weight of everything she had ever been. She had grown up on camera, survived the pressures of fame, endured heartbreak, and reclaimed her place in Hollywood. But she couldn't escape her own mind, or her fear of the deep. On the morning of November 28th, 1981, she walked down to the harbor at Catalina Island, wearing a red jacket and a smile that seemed tired but sincere. Witnesses said she laughed as she boarded the Splendor. No one could have guessed that it would be the last time anyone would see her alive. The sea was calm that evening, deceptively calm, like a scene waiting for tragedy. Natalie had spent decades acting in stories about heartbreak and loss. Now she was about to live one. And when her body was later found drifting near the yacht, face down, clothed in a nightgown and red jacket, the world would ask the question that still echoes across Hollywood's shores. What really happened to Natalie Wood that night? Hollywood has always sold the illusion of perfect love, the kind of romance that glows under camera lights and ends with a kiss before the credits roll. But behind the curtains, the real stories are far darker. Natalie Wood knew that better than anyone. When she and Robert Wagner first fell in love in the 1950s, they were the golden couple of the silver screen. Magazines called them America's sweethearts. He was the dream, tall, charming, with that effortless smile. She was the perfect starlet, soft-spoken, radiant, and magnetic. Together, they seemed untouchable, but perfection is a dangerous illusion, and in Hollywood, it doesn't last. In the beginning, they adored each other. They lived in a mansion overlooking Los Angeles, threw parties filled with laughter and champagne, and danced under chandeliers with other stars. But behind the glimmer, cracks began to show. Robert Wagner was ambitious, but his career never quite matched Natalie's. She was landing leading roles: West Side Story, Splendor in the Grass, Gypsy, while his fame plateaued. For a man raised in an era when pride and dominance defined masculinity, that was hard to swallow. Friends recalled that Wagner could be controlling. He wanted Natalie close, dependent, loyal. The perfect wife in public, the obedient partner in private. But Natalie was growing. She was no longer the little girl molded by studios or the starlet groomed for men's attention. She was becoming her own person. The more independent she became, the more distant Robert grew. By 1962, the tension between them exploded. There were shouting matches, jealousy, and rumors of infidelity on both sides. Some said Natalie caught Wagner flirting with another woman. Others whispered she had fallen for another man during filming. Whatever the truth was, their marriage ended abruptly and painfully. I've lived too much of my life in public, pretending everything was perfect. I just want to feel safe. Robert Wagner, meanwhile, drifted through relationships, never quite escaping the shadow of Natalie. He often spoke about her in interviews, his tone nostalgic, wistful. He called her the one that got away. Fate, it seems, wasn't finished with them. In 1972, 10 years after their divorce, they met again at a dinner party. Both older, wiser, and carrying the scars of failed love. Wagner was newly divorced. Natalie was lonely and searching for something familiar the moment they saw each other. Something reignited. Within months, they were inseparable again. In 1972, they remarried. Hollywood gasped. It was the comeback of the decade, the ultimate love story reborn. Magazines called it a perfect second chance. But behind the glossy photos and soft smiles, the same storm still brewed. Natalie's second marriage to Wagner was more mature, but not more peaceful. They both had tempers, they both drank, and they both carried ghosts from their past. Wagner, by many accounts, was deeply possessive. He adored Natalie but also feared losing her, not to another man, but to her career, her independence, and her audience. Natalie was once again in demand, and Wagner's career was fading into television work. That imbalance festered like an open wound. Then, in 1981, Natalie began filming Brainstorm, a science fiction movie that paired her with Christopher Walken, an intense, eccentric actor known for his mysterious presence. Walken was everything Wagner wasn't: young, unpredictable, and intellectually fascinating. Natalie admired him. She often spoke about how talented and different he was, and that admiration didn't go unnoticed. Wagner grew jealous. Crew members recalled seeing tension whenever Wagner visited the set. Some said Natalie and Walken's friendship was innocent. Others swore it was flirtatious, maybe even romantic. No one could ever prove anything, but what mattered was how it looked and how it made Wagner feel. When filming ended, Natalie invited Walken to spend a weekend on their yacht, Splendor, along with the ship's captain, Dennis Davern. It wasn't unusual. Hollywood friends often took casual getaways to Catalina Island, but those who knew the couple sensed something different about this trip. Natalie was exhausted. She had been working nonstop. She wanted peace, maybe even closure, a chance to rest, to breathe. But bringing Walken into that confined space with her husband, that decision would prove fatal. Wagner reportedly hesitated but agreed. After all, what could possibly go wrong? It would just be a few days at sea. Dinner, drinks, and the ocean breeze. Yet, on the night of November 28th, 1981, something did go wrong. Terribly wrong. According to later statements, the weekend started well. They docked near Catalina Island, had dinner, drank wine, and laughed. But as night fell, so did the mood. Wagner grew increasingly tense. He drank heavily, watching Natalie and Walken talk and laugh at the table. To him, it looked too intimate, too friendly. And the alcohol turned his unease into anger. At some point, Walken made a remark about Natalie's career, about how she should focus on acting and not let domestic life hold her back. To Wagner, that was an insult, a suggestion that he was dragging her down. The conversation quickly became a confrontation. Voices rose, glasses clinked. The atmosphere turned electric. Captain Dennis Davern would later claim that Wagner smashed a bottle of wine, shouting, "What are you trying to do? Fuck my wife?" From that moment, the night spiraled. Walken reportedly retreated to his cabin. Natalie and Wagner continued arguing on deck. The wind picked up. The ocean darkened. And then, silence. The last anyone saw of Natalie Wood alive. She was standing near the back of the yacht, dressed in a nightgown and red jacket, staring into the black water below. No one knows what she was thinking. Was she trying to cool off after the argument? Was she trying to untie a dinghy that had been banging against the boat? Or was she trying to get away just for a moment? We will never know. But what happened next would turn that quiet night into a Hollywood legend drenched in tragedy. The wind carried a restless hum over the Pacific that night. It was November 28th, 1981, a Saturday, and the small harbor at Catalina Island was glowing with the faint lights of moored yachts. Most people were asleep, but aboard one vessel, laughter and tension blended like wine and gasoline. The Splendor, 42 feet of polished wood and quiet luxury, rocked gently under the stars. Inside, 4 people sat around a small table. Natalie Wood, Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, and Dennis Davern, the yacht's captain. Dinner plates sat half-cleared. Empty glasses glimmered. A bottle of champagne hissed open, with a soft pop that would soon feel like an omen. For the first few hours, everything seemed normal. Around 9 p.m., the temperature dropped, and so did the mood. Wagner poured himself another drink, stronger, slower. Walken spoke about how Natalie should take more serious roles again, maybe even return to Broadway. He said her talent was too great to waste on domestic life. He meant it as a compliment, but Wagner took it as a challenge, a suggestion that he was holding her back. Witnesses later described Wagner's eyes hardening, his smile tightening. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Wagner said, "What do you know about marriage, Chris?" Walken chuckled awkwardly, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. Minutes later, voices began to rise. The tone turned sharp, defensive. Natalie tried to diffuse it. She always did, but the wine had done its work. Old arguments resurfaced, the kind that never really die. Just wait for the right moment to strike. The captain, Dennis Davern, sensed what was coming. He slipped quietly to the upper deck, pretending to tidy ropes, giving them space, or maybe giving himself distance. It's said that around 10:30 p.m., Wagner and Walken were in a full-blown argument. Natalie tried to calm them. her voice trembling but firm. Words were exchanged, sharp, slurred, venomous. A bottle shattered against the table. Wine spilled like blood across the wood. Davern rushed back in, startled. He later claimed he saw Wagner standing, fists clenched, red-faced. Walken had backed away, refusing to fight. Natalie, pale and shaking, told them both to stop. She then stormed off toward her cabin, slamming the door. Walken retreated to his own room below deck, muttering something about too much alcohol and too little reason. The night grew quiet again, the kind of quiet that hides the sound of something breaking. Around midnight, the sea turned rougher. Waves tapped against the hull, rhythmic and cold. Somewhere above, footsteps creaked. Davern heard movement, a door opening, then closing. He thought Natalie had gone to bed, but she hadn't. Later, when he replayed the night in his mind, he realized the noises came from the back of the yacht, where the small, inflatable dinghy was tied. The dinghy had been making noise all night, bumping against the hull. Natalie had complained about it earlier. She hated the sound. The next sound Davern remembered was different. A heavy thud, followed by silence. He didn't check. Not yet. At 1:15 a.m., Davern noticed something strange. The light in Natalie's cabin was still on. The door was slightly open, swaying with the motion of the waves. He knocked softly. No answer. He pushed it open. The bed was empty. Her nightgown was gone. So was her red jacket. And the dinghy, the small boat tied to the Splendor, was missing. Davern's stomach tightened. He walked quickly to the main cabin, where Wagner was sitting, staring at a half-empty glass. When Davern told him Natalie was gone, Wagner didn't react right away. He just stared, as if the words hadn't registered. Then, coldly, he said, "She must have taken the dinghy. She's probably gone ashore." But something in his voice didn't sound right. The night air outside was brutal. Black waves, cold wind, and a sea that swallowed light whole. Natalie, terrified of dark water, had left in the middle of the night, alone, in her nightgown. Davern didn't believe it. Instead of alerting the Coast Guard immediately, Wagner poured another drink. He told Davern they would wait. Maybe Natalie would come back. Minutes turned into hours. At 2:30 a.m., the harbor was still. Other yachts nearby heard faint shouting earlier in the night, but dismissed it as partying. Now there was only the wind. Finally, at 3:30 a.m., more than 2 hours after she vanished, Wagner radioed the authorities. "We've lost someone off the boat," he said, his voice calm but shaky. "My wife is missing." The Coast Guard arrived shortly before dawn. As the sun began to rise over the Pacific, a police helicopter spotted something red floating a mile away from the Splendor. It was Natalie Wood, face down, her body drifting in the soft morning light, dressed in her nightgown, socks, and red jacket, the same one she had been wearing at dinner. Her hair fanned around her like a halo. Her arms were stretched forward, as if she had been reaching for something that wasn't there. Nearby, the dinghy was found washed ashore. The motor was off. The oars were inside. The line that had tied it to the yacht had been pulled loose, not cut. The scene didn't make sense. If Natalie had tried to escape, why didn't she start the motor? If she had fallen accidentally, how did she end up so far away? There were bruises on her body, small, scattered, unexplained. The coroner called it an accidental drowning, but even then, whispers of doubt began to spread. When the news broke, Hollywood froze. A star was dead. A mystery was born. Robert Wagner was devastated, or at least that's how the cameras saw him. He gave brief, trembling statements. Walken vanished from the public eye, refusing to talk about the night. Davern told police what he knew, but his story shifted over time, sometimes cautious, sometimes accusing. The Splendor was silent again, its decks scrubbed clean, but on that cold November night, something had happened that could never be washed away. And as investigators began to piece together the fragments of truth, one thing became clear. No one on that yacht was telling the whole story. The night began like so many others in Hollywood, with champagne, laughter, and the illusion that nothing could go wrong. It was November 28th, 1981. Aboard the 60-foot yacht Splendor, anchored off Santa Catalina Island, Natalie Wood, one of Hollywood's brightest stars, was spending the weekend with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and their guest, actor Christopher Walken. To outsiders, it sounded idyllic. A quiet weekend getaway. Just 3 celebrities and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. But beneath the calm waters of the Pacific, tension had already begun to build. The day had been marked by wine, laughter, and nostalgia. Yet by evening, what had started as a retreat would spiral into one of Hollywood's greatest unsolved mysteries. Natalie Wood had always loved the sea, but she also feared it. Friends recalled how, as a child, she confessed to a psychic's prediction: beware dark water. Still, she loved sailing with Wagner. He had named the yacht Splendor after one of her films, a token of devotion. That Saturday night, the yacht was moored just off 2 harbors, a quiet inlet on Catalina Island. Dinner had been served, steak, wine, laughter echoing through the cabin walls. But those laughs hid old resentments. Natalie and Wagner's marriage had weathered years of breakups and reconciliations. Walken, her co-star in Brainstorm, had joined them for the weekend, and Wagner, by many accounts, didn't like the chemistry between them. According to the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, the atmosphere that evening shifted from friendly to volatile as alcohol flowed. Excerpt, Captain Dennis Davern, 1981. They were all drinking. At first it was fine. Music, dinner, conversation. But the mood changed fast. Robert was upset. Natalie and Christopher were talking closely, laughing. Too closely, maybe. Davern recalled that Wagner's jealousy had always simmered beneath the surface. That night, it boiled over at around 10 p.m. They were seen at Doug's Harbor Reef, the local restaurant and bar on the island. Witnesses later described the group as cheerful but drunk. They shared wine, dinner, and several rounds of cocktails. By the time they left, Natalie had reportedly told the restaurant manager she wanted to head back to the yacht early. A small argument at the dock followed. a glimpse of the storm to come. When they returned to splendor, the night grew darker in more ways than one. Once aboard, the yacht rocked gently against the tide. Walken retired to his cabin. Natalie, according to Davern, seemed upset. She and Wagner had begun to argue again. The sound of raised voices broke the stillness of the Pacific. Excerpt, Davern, 1981 interview. I was in the wheelhouse. I could hear them arguing, loud. Words about jealousy, about Chris. Robert was shouting. Natalie was crying. What the argument was truly about remains a matter of speculation. Some claim it centered on Walken, that Wagner accused Natalie of flirting with him. Others believe it was an old argument resurfaced. Natalie's long-standing wish to step back from Hollywood. Wagner's fear of losing her again. Around 11 p.m., according to the captain, the shouting stopped. Then came silence. The next part of the story unfolds like a nightmare that no one saw beginning. At approximately midnight, Davern noticed something strange. The small inflatable dinghy, the Valiant, was gone, and so was Natalie. Excerpt, Davern, 1981. I went to check on everyone. I didn't see Natalie. I looked around. The dinghy was missing. I told Robert, I can't find her. He said, she's probably gone to shore. But it didn't make sense. The sea was rough. It was cold. According to Wagner's original statement, he believed Natalie had gone to retie the dinghy, which had been banging against the hull and keeping her awake. But Davern insisted there was more to it. That something had happened after the argument. Excerpt, Davern, 2011. Robert told me, she's gone, don't turn on the searchlights, don't call anyone. I didn't understand. We just waited. They waited, in silence, as the Pacific stretched out in darkness. An hour passed, then another. By 1:30 a.m., the stillness of the ocean had turned haunting. Waves lapped softly against the hull, carrying whispers that no one could understand. Natalie Wood, one of Hollywood's most beloved stars, was gone. The woman who had danced through West Side Story, who had survived fame, heartbreak, and scandal, now lost somewhere in the black water she had always feared. It wasn't until 3:30 a.m. that a distress call went out to the Coast Guard. By dawn, a search operation had begun. At 7:45 a.m., November 29th, 1981, the body of Natalie Wood was found floating face down less than a mile from the yacht. She was wearing a red down jacket, flannel nightgown, and blue socks. Nearby, the dinghy Valiant was discovered beached on the rocky shore. There was no sign of a struggle on the dinghy, no broken oars, no engine damage. But something didn't add up. The autopsy revealed bruises on her arms, legs, and even her face. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning, complicated by alcohol and a fear of water. Yet investigators were left uneasy. Excerpt, Coroner's Office, 1981. The bruises could be consistent with a fall or with an altercation. The evidence is inconclusive. For years, that phrase, inconclusive evidence, would haunt the case. The accounts of that night never matched perfectly. Robert Wagner maintained that it was a tragic accident, that Natalie must have slipped while trying to secure the dinghy. Excerpt, Robert Wagner, 1981. There was no fight. We had been drinking. Natalie couldn't sleep. The dinghy was loose. She went to fix it. That's all I know. But Captain Davern's version changed over time. Decades later, he would confess that he'd been pressured to stay silent. Excerpt: Davern. 2011, 48 hours interview. Robert was angry. I heard them arguing. Then silence. I think something happened. I don't think Natalie just slipped. But I was scared. He told me not to call anyone. Christopher Walken, the third witness, rarely spoke publicly about that night. In one rare interview, he said quietly, "You hear a lot of things. Nobody knows. It was an accident. That's what I believe." But the question remained. If Natalie feared water so deeply, why would she step onto that dinghy in the dark alone? After drinking heavily, on a stormy night, the Splendor was towed back to the mainland, its white paint gleaming under a gray sky. On board, silence hung heavier than any fog. The Hollywood press erupted with speculation. Headlines screamed, "Natalie Wood drowns off Catalina," while tabloids hinted at darker truths: jealousy, violence, secrets behind closed cabin doors. In the official report, the Coast Guard noted, weather conditions poor, visibility low, possible misstep during attempt to secure dinghy, ... But friends of Natalie refused to believe it was so simple. Actress Jill St. John, who later married Wagner, said, "Natalie loved life too much to take that risk. She wasn't reckless." For decades, the story remained sealed, officially ruled an accident. But in 2012, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case after new testimony from Captain Davern. 2 years later, the cause of death was amended to drowning and other undetermined factors. Excerpt: Detective Ralph Hernandez, 2018. There are inconsistencies in the statements. The bruising on her body, the delay in calling for help, they raise questions. This is now considered a suspicious death. Wagner, now in his 80s, was later named a person of interest, though never charged. The case remains open, unsolved, and clouded in silence. To this day, the Pacific around Catalina remains eerily calm, as if holding the secret it refused to surrender in 1981. The yacht Splendor was sold years later, its decks stripped, its name changed. But those who step aboard say the air feels heavy, as though the sea itself remembers. Natalie Wood was 43. Her life, one of triumphs, heartbreak, and contradictions, ended in the same mystery that seemed to shadow her since childhood. "Beware dark water," the psychic had once said. And in the end, that warning proved prophetic. The truth of what happened aboard Splendor may never be fully known. Perhaps it was an accident, a tragic misstep in the night. Or perhaps the ocean keeps its secrets, the same way Hollywood does, beneath layers of beauty, illusion, and silence. The morning light over Catalina Island was gray and heavy. The sea, calm now, seemed almost ashamed of what it had given back. As search boats circled the quiet cove, cameras flashed from the mainland, and the name Natalie Wood echoed through police radios. The world had lost a Hollywood legend. For investigators, however, the focus was not the star, but the mysteries surrounding her final hours. And almost immediately, things didn't add up. When detectives arrived at the marina, Splendor sat silently at anchor. The yacht's paint gleamed under the morning sun, but inside, the atmosphere was grim. Robert Wagner waited on deck, pale and motionless. Christopher Walken stayed below, quiet, cooperative, but distant. And Captain Dennis Davern, he looked exhausted. Detectives began with the basics. The timeline. Dinner, drinks, argument, disappearance, the missing dinghy. Wagner's account seemed calm, composed, almost rehearsed. He insisted Natalie must have gone to secure the dinghy that night, slipped, and drowned. But investigators soon realized something didn't fit. The weather had been rough, winds up to 20 knots, water cold and choppy. No one, especially someone afraid of deep water, would have climbed down to retie a boat in that darkness. Later that day, in a sterile room at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, pathologist Dr. Thomas Noguchi began his examination. Natalie's body told a story, but it wasn't a simple one. She had multiple bruises on her arms, her legs, even her face. Some looked fresh, others older. Tiny scratches on her neck, abrasions on her wrists. And yet, there was no sign of a struggle that could definitively link them to violence. The toxicology report showed a blood alcohol level of 0.14%. She had consumed wine and possibly a mild sedative, enough to impair her balance, but not enough to fully explain why she'd gone overboard. Dr. Noguchi noted that her lungs were filled with seawater, confirming drowning as the primary cause of death. But he also saw something else. Traces of foam in her airway, suggesting she had been alive, struggling, gasping for breath as the cold water closed in. The official report listed the cause of death as accidental drowning and hypothermia. Still, among the coroner's notes, a line stood out, quiet, almost uncertain. Bruises may be consistent with fall, or possibly with altercation. Those few words would haunt the case for decades. Back at the marina, reporters swarmed the dock. Questions came fast, accusations faster. But Wagner avoided interviews. Walken returned to the mainland and refused to comment. The only one who seemed willing to talk was Captain Davern, though even he spoke carefully, nervously. Detectives interviewed him for hours. His story was simple at first. They'd been drinking, they'd argued, Natalie had gone missing. But small inconsistencies crept in. He couldn't recall exactly when he last saw her. He hesitated when asked about the argument. And most troubling of all, he admitted they hadn't called for help immediately. Why wait? Why not alert the Coast Guard the moment they noticed she was gone? Davern's answer was vague. Mr. Wagner said she might have taken the dinghy to shore. Investigators exchanged glances. It didn't make sense. The nearest shore was dark rocky, and nearly 2 miles away. By the following week, the official version was everywhere. Hollywood star Natalie Wood dies in tragic boating accident. The press turned it into a tragedy of glamour, a life cut short, a perfect storm of alcohol, love, and misfortune. The police closed the case. Robert Wagner was never considered a suspect. Christopher Walken moved on, taking roles but never speaking of that night again. For the public, it became another Hollywood myth. But for those inside the investigation, the file never truly closed. It just gathered dust. Decades passed. In interviews, Wagner would grow visibly emotional when asked about Natalie. He'd say, "There's not a day I don't think about her. But Captain Davern couldn't let it go." Over the years, guilt gnawed at him. He began to question his silence and what he'd really seen that night. In 2011, 3 decades after Natalie's death, Davern broke his silence. He publicly stated that the original story wasn't the truth, that the argument had been violent, that he'd heard a crash, shouting, and then silence, and that Wagner had told him not to turn on the searchlights, not to call for help. Suddenly, the story the world thought it knew cracked open. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case in November 2011. Forensic experts revisited every detail: autopsy photos, weather reports, even the yacht's old navigation logs. Detectives soon realized that some of the bruises on Natalie's body appeared inconsistent with a simple fall. Some were on the inside of her forearm, places hard to bruise accidentally, others on her thigh and shin, suggesting she might have been pushed or grabbed. Investigators also noted that the dinghy, when found, was in near perfect condition, its oars neatly in place, the motor off. If she'd fallen while trying to climb in, there should have been signs of struggle, splashes, impact marks. There were none. There were too many inconsistencies, said Detective Ralph Fernandez years later. It didn't look like an accident anymore. But there was no clear evidence of homicide either. No witnesses, no confession, no forensic smoking gun, only silence, suspicion, and the endless ocean. In 2012, the coroner's office made a rare move. It amended Natalie Wood's death certificate. The cause of death was changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. That small change meant everything. It said, without saying, this wasn't just an accident. Reporters flooded the case again. Interviews with experts, retired detectives, even family members, all searching for what had truly happened aboard Splendor. The lead detective summarized the dilemma. We have enough to question the story, but not enough to close it. We're left with possibilities, not proof. Robert Wagner, now elderly, continued to deny any wrongdoing. He called the renewed investigation absurd and painful. He said, "It was an accident. There's nothing more to it." But the shadow of doubt had already taken hold. In 2018, detectives named Wagner a person of interest, not a suspect, but the only person on that yacht who could answer questions that no one else could. And yet, He refused to speak to investigators again. For Captain Davern, it was a long-delayed reckoning. He appeared on television, voice trembling, as he admitted, "I didn't tell the truth before. I was protecting him. I was scared. I regret it every day. But memory is fragile. After 30 years, even honesty becomes blurred by time. And the Pacific keeps its secrets well. Modern forensic technology could have answered much, if only it had existed then. Today, investigators use luminol, micro-trace analysis, digital sonar mapping. But in 1981, evidence was limited to photographs, blood tests, and witness statements. By the time the case was reopened, crucial evidence was gone. Fibers lost, DNA degraded, yacht refurbished. So detectives pieced together a puzzle with missing corners. They reconstructed timelines, analyzed radio logs, and compared conflicting statements. Still, every path led back to the same haunting truth. No one saw her go into the water. Detective Hernandez once described the case as a riddle wrapped in salt water. Every clue seemed to contradict another. One witness claimed to have heard a woman's cry around midnight, "Help me, somebody help me," drifting over the water. But by the time anyone looked, the sound was gone. Others on nearby boats reported hearing loud arguing, but couldn't tell where it came from. Some swore they heard a crash, glass breaking, followed by silence. Each piece of evidence was tantalizing, but inconclusive. "It's like the ocean erased the truth," Hernandez said quietly. Investigators returned to Catalina Island in 2013, retracing the final path. They interviewed locals who'd been on the island that weekend, bartenders, harbor workers, even a few boaters who remembered hearing raised voices from Splendor. But the memories had faded, warped by decades and gossip. No one could pinpoint a fact that broke the case open. Still, the detectives stood on that same rocky shore where the dinghy had been found, waves licking the sand, the wind carrying whispers of 1981. For a moment, they imagined what had really happened and how quickly it could have all gone wrong. By 2018, the investigation had once again gone quiet. No charges, no closure, just the official statement. The death of Natalie Wood remains an open case. And so it stands, a mystery frozen in time. A case built on fragments, contradictions, and a truth that may lie forever beneath the surface. For the detectives who worked it, Natalie's story became more than a file. It became a reminder that even in a world obsessed with answers, some questions never stop echoing. 40 years later, the tragedy of Natalie Wood remains one of Hollywood's most haunting unsolved cases. The files sit locked in an archive, the ink fading, the photos yellowing. But each year, someone still asks, what really happened aboard the yacht Splendor that night? The police found no fingerprints of foul play, no conclusive proof of murder. Yet, as one detective put it, sometimes the absence of evidence is its own evidence. The ocean around Catalina rolls on, endlessly washing over the place where glamour met tragedy. And in the stillness of those waters, the truth sleeps, somewhere between fact and myth, love and jealousy, silence and the sound of waves breaking on steel.